Mercury, the god of commerce, presides over Jacopo Barbari's map of Venice of 1500. But although being a major commercial and industrial centre, Venice was known for her religious life. Amazing, isn't it, the density and variety of religious buildings, monasteries, abbeys, almonries, friaries and convents, confraternity houses, hospices and charities, and numerous parish churches. The citizen of 16th century Venice, it seemed, could not but be a good Catholic. Contemporaries often thought so. The extraordinary concentration of sacred objects, supplying the occasion for elaborate processions and mass reverence, impressed Venetians and visitors alike with a sense of the city's peculiar piety, as we see in Gentile Bellini's painting of 1496, The Procession of the True Cross. This painting, by Lazzaro Bastiani of 1494, reconstructs the donation of the highly prized relic of the True Cross to Andrea Vendramini in 1369. The painting used to hang in the Scuola San Giovanni Evangelista, and next to it was a painting by Gentile Bellini showing the guardian of the Scuola, Andrea Vendramini, diving into the canal to rescue the relic after it had been knocked over by the crowd. In Bellini's Procession of the True Cross, we see how, once possessed, relics could perform miracles. Kneeling among the bystanders is the merchant Jacopo de Salis, whose son was miraculously healed in 1414 by the relic. In another painting by Carpaccio, we see the Patriarch of Grado using the relic to exorcise a possessed man. The painting places this miraculous event in the heart of Venice, on the Grand Canal next to the old Rialto Bridge. Crossing the bridge, we can see the procession of members of the confraternity. The regular ritual of religious piety acts as intermediary between the miraculous and the bustle of everyday life. Besides St. Mark the patron saint buried in the basilica, there were reputed to be more than 50 saints' bodies in Venice, together with a huge and ever-increasing collection of relics. In Antwerp, the divine presence was no less pronounced. Here too, the townscape is dominated by devotional buildings. Spires like fingers stab at the sky. Church towers stand erect. Like spiritual sentinels, they safeguard the souls of the citizens below. Then there are chapels and shrines, infirmaries and priories, monasteries and nunneries, all pillared and buttressed, sound in foundation, firm in faith. Off the main street and down the alleyways. Religious art testifies to the intensity and appeal of popular faith. Artists and sculptors used their skill to inflame the spiritual imagination of the faithful, to show the sufferings of Christ and facilitate repentance of sin. But it is the Cathedral of Our Lady which supplied Antwerp's dominant image. On the City Hall, on the Butcher's Hall, benign and benevolent, overlooking the public thoroughfares. The Virgin and Child are everywhere. Bononiensis map of 1565 shows us the sheer acreage consumed by devotional buildings. Judging by this, you might reasonably conclude that religion played a very large part in the lives of the people of these two cities. Look at the diversity of styles: Brabantine Gothic, Venetian Renaissance and local variants, Palladian austere classicism. From all this, you might conclude that Catholicism, for all its claim to universality and uniformity, was not a monolithic religion. Both conclusions are justified. Unlike our own times, when religion barely extends beyond rites of passage, Renaissance Christianity mediated both rights of labor and rights of state. The urban order was structured around membership of a dense and overlapping network of religious communities. We see one such community in the parish of Santa Maria Formosa. At the most basic level, the parish church provided a place of public worship and public assembly. Sacraments and sociability were closely connected. The integrity of the family and the instruction of the young were additional responsibilities. What was heard was reinforced by what was seen. This chapel belonged to the confraternity of the Concezioni. The altarpiece of 1473, by one of the famous family of Venetian painters, the Vivarini, shows a traditional form of the Madonna della Misericordia, sheltering members of the confraternity with her cloak. Its members attended to funeral rites and at one time used to accompany condemned men to execution. If regularly employed, the male parishioner was likely as not to belong to one of the many trades guilds that proliferated in both cities. In the church, we find one of the more humble confraternities, the fruiterers. On the first year of each dogeship, they would process to the Palazzo Ducale and present 25 enormous melons to the Doge. Their altar was granted in 1423, although the decoration is late 16th century. An image in relief of the fruiterer's patron saint, San Josepha, can still be seen in the outside wall of their confraternity building. Around the Campo, we see houses of rich merchants and bankers dating from the 13th century onwards. Behind the splendor of the Campo lived the poor in often narrow streets and small tenements. The church centered around the celebration of the Mass at the high altar, but the side chapels included altars of no less than 9 confraternities. This is the chapel of the Bombardiers. Founded in 1501, they commissioned this altarpiece by Palmiro Giovani in 1509. Santa Barbara, their patron saint, is shown with her martyr's palm and fortified tower. Here the confraternity held sung masses and processions. On the first day of the purification, when the Doge visited the church, the Bombardiers formed the Guard of Honors. They had a confraternity house adjoining the church, as we see in the Barbary map. Altered in 1599 and much later, we can still find the representation of Santa Barbara set in the wall. The bombardiers would have worked in the arsenal, the industrial source of Venice's naval power. The Capello family paid for the facade facing the canal in 1450, placing a memorial to Vincenzo Capello, elected Captain General of the Sea in 1538. The intrusion of the secular into the spiritual sphere does not indicate a progression towards the dechristianized society of our day. In Antwerp, the Maagdenhuis, a home for orphan girls, was founded in 1552. Many of the duties, which today are discharged by the state, were then performed by voluntary agencies administered by those in religious orders. But the land was provided by the rich merchant and speculator Gilbert van Schoonbecker. Enrolling for 5 years as almoner carried with it onerous and expensive duties, but also the hope of spiritual reward. During the period of Calvinism, the line is broken. Pro de law non ordinari, sed intrusi. The statue known as Wooden Clara shows an orphan girl much as she might have looked in the 16th century. Wooden Clara became a proverbial symbol of pious duty for Antwerp burghers. Hospitals, too, were imbued with a Christian spirit. The St. Elizabeth Hospital was founded in the 13th century, although it's been enlarged since. The chapel dates from the early 15th century and was an important element in the complex. Inside, the Calvinist image breakers stripped the interior in the 1560s, so the furnishings belong to the 17th century. A recent restoration has uncovered 16th century frescoes which had been whitewashed over. Pairs of saints believed to have special healing powers carry their attributes. Sufferers look not to science but to the supernatural, to the saints rather than the surgeons, to St. Adrian with his sword to combat plague and prevent sudden death, to Cornelius with his horn for help against attacks of gout, whooping cough and convulsions, and to St. Stephen, who was stoned to death for relief from headaches and obsessions. The hospital has one of the few surviving wards from the 15th century. From their beds, the sick could see a small chapel, rebuilt later, where Mass was performed. Because of the presence of foreign trading communities like the Germans at the Hessenhuis in Antwerp, and here in Venice, the cities had to accommodate heterodox belief. This is the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, the German trading centre, near the Rialto, in the heart of commercial Venice. And throughout Venice, comparable provision was required for the other trading communities. For instance, the Dalmatians had their own confraternity chapel, San Giorgio degli Schiavoni. Here is their patron saint, St. George, slaying the dragon. And indeed, as the 16th century progressed, these communities were given privileged status by the Venetians, anxious to secure trade with the East. San Giorgio dei Greci was the focal point of a 3,000-strong Greek community. From the outside, it looks like a typical Venetian Catholic church, and it was built by a leading Venetian architect, Sante Lombardo. Inside, however, it is clear that we are dealing with a church designed to accommodate the Greek Orthodox ritual. A characteristic feature is the iconostasis, which shields the priest from the congregation during the performance of certain rituals. In the traditional manner, the iconostasis displays much venerated icons, painted following the approved Byzantine style. Within the enclosure, there was a school, confraternity house, and a cemetery. At the northern limits of the city, on the site of a disused foundry or ghetto, was the site allocated to the largest non-Christian minority, the Jews. It was an island site, and the pressure of population forced the buildings up higher than elsewhere in Venice. If these forbidding walls looked like a fortress, they also constituted a prison. Jews were confined from dusk to dawn. Here is one of the two entrances through which Jews daily passed. As you go in, you can see the bolt holes which were used to close the doors at night. Venetian Jewry was confined to a segregated existence in the ghetto, a life apart with little dignity and no security. Here on the Campo was played out the social, economic and religious life of the community. There were merchants and bankers from Spain, Portugal, Germany and the Levant, as well as from Italy. It was the contacts and the wealth they produced which gave the ghetto such security as it enjoyed. The credits raised here floated many a Venetian merchant fleet. This is the Banco Rosso, which issued red receipts for loans. Each of the trading nations had its place of worship. This is the Italian synagogue, built in 1575. Across the way is the German synagogue. Significantly, it is tucked away on the fourth floor so as not to give offense to the Christian majority. Apart from various stone inscriptions, there's no exterior decoration to identify the Scuola Grande Tedesca, or the Great German Synagogue. We find both a richly decorated and an intimate space. It has a trapezoid form with a bimmer at one end, which was used for reading the Torah. In the 16th century, the bimmer would have been in the center of this space, a focal point with seats around it and lit from a skylight above to emphasize the importance of the readings from the Torah. At the other end is the recess for the Ark, where the sacred scrolls were kept. On the canal side, the projecting niche indicates the recess built to house the Ark. The liturgy prescribed the ceremonial removal of the Torah's scrolls from the Ark and their transference to the bimmer. Women were hidden from view behind lattice frames to protect men against impure thoughts which defiled both the worshipper and his prayer. Nothing like this can be seen in Antwerp. Its clandestine synagogues have passed without trace. Even Antwerp's significant Protestant minority provided posterity with little visual documentation. Hogenberg's prints show preachers taking to the hedgerows safely outside the city. Another engraving bears witness to the iconoclasm practiced by the Calvinists. The Church of St. Anna Capelle was built in 1513 by the Cloth Shearers Guild. During the Calvinist period, it was stripped of its original decoration to make the kind of bare, unadorned space which the Calvinists preferred. However, no trace of this austerity remains. The 17th century Baroque altar and statues were installed after the Catholic reconquest of Antwerp. In Venice, there was no such Protestant interruption. The Catholic Church remained the centre of everyday life. In September 1576, after nearly a third of the population had died a terrible outbreak of plague, the Senate vowed to build a church to Christ the Saviour, the Redentore, and the Doge agreed to visit it every year in thanksgiving for the end of the plague. Palladio's Redentore church combined symbolically a votive temple and a triumphant representation of the Tridentine doctrine of redemption. The interior is almost devoid of painted decoration. The effects were achieved by a giant order of Corinthian columns. This is a church meant for great public ceremonies. The building produces its effects by harnessing the authority of antique Roman architecture with its Corinthian columns and entablature in support of the authority of the church. The medieval Dominican monastic church of St. Paul's in Antwerp was rebuilt during the 16th century. It was not even finished when the Calvinists took it over, stripping out the decoration and expelling the Dominicans, the preachers, in 1578. What you can see now, including these incredibly elaborate and emotive confessionals, was added in the early 17th century. Life-sized images of saints surround the booths for confession. These sculptures dramatize the message of Tridentine Catholic Reformation. And here is St. Paul preaching to the congregation. And here are saints interceding, as the monks were, with their sung masses in the choir. On this evidence, at the close of the 16th century, religion was still socially and culturally dominant.